Garrett's hand trembled as he pressed himself against the cold wall of the garage, his breath forming small clouds in the freezing December air. Through the crack in the door, he watched his wife Bryn kneeling on the concrete floor, her shoulders shaking with what sounded like sobs. The dim light from a single bulb cast shadows across her face, and in her hands she clutched something he couldn't quite make out. His heart pounded so hard he thought she might hear it. This was it. Christmas Eve, midnight. And after 3 months of watching her slip out of their bed every single night at the exact same time, he was finally about to discover what his wife had been hiding from him. What he saw next made his blood run cold, and nothing could have prepared him for the truth that was about to shatter everything he thought he knew about the woman he'd married. Before we continue with this shocking story, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves dramatic stories, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next upload. Also, drop a comment below, telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our viewers all around the world. Now, let's get back to the story. It had started 3 months ago, in late September. Garrett remembered the exact night because it was their 5th wedding anniversary. They'd celebrated at Romano's, their favorite Italian restaurant in downtown Portland, Oregon. Bryn had worn that emerald green dress that made her hazel eyes sparkle, and she'd seemed so happy, so genuinely in love with him. They'd come home, shared a bottle of wine on the couch, and fallen asleep in each other's arms watching an old movie. Everything had been perfect. Everything had been normal. But that night, sometime around midnight, Garrett had woken up to find the bed empty beside him. At first he thought Bryn had just gone to the bathroom. He'd rolled over and tried to fall back asleep. But 20 minutes passed, then 30, and she still hadn't returned. Worried, he'd gotten up to look for her. The bathroom was empty. The kitchen was dark. And then he'd noticed the faint glow of light coming from under the garage door. He'd found her sitting on an old wooden stool in the garage, staring at the wall with tears streaming down her face. When she'd noticed him standing in the doorway, she'd jumped up so fast the stool had toppled over. "Honey, what's wrong?" Garrett had asked, rushing toward her. "Why are you crying?" Bryn had quickly wiped her face and forced a smile. "Nothing, I'm fine. I just couldn't sleep. Sometimes I come out here to think when I have insomnia. The quiet helps." It had seemed reasonable enough at the time. Bryn worked as a pediatric nurse at Mercy General Hospital, and her job was stressful. She often had trouble sleeping after particularly difficult shifts. Garrett had wrapped his arms around her, kissed her forehead, and led her back to bed. But then it happened again the next night. And the night after that. And every single night since. At first, Garrett tried to be understanding. He told himself it was just a phase, that whatever was bothering her would pass. But as the weeks turned into months, his concern grew into something darker, something that kept him awake even when exhaustion pulled at his bones. The secrecy was what troubled him most. Bryn had always been open with him about everything. They didn't keep secrets, or at least he'd thought they didn't. He'd tried talking to her about it several times. "Bryn, you're going to the garage every night. What's going on? Is something wrong? Are you upset with me?" Each time she'd give him the same answer with slight variations. "I told you, honey, I just can't sleep sometimes. The garage is quiet. It helps me clear my head. It's nothing to worry about." But Garrett did worry. He worried constantly. He'd started noticing other small changes, too. Bryn had become more distant, more distracted. She'd forget conversations they'd had just hours before. Sometimes he'd catch her staring into space with such profound sadness in her eyes that it physically hurt him to see. And whenever he asked what she was thinking about, she'd snap back to reality and say, "Nothing. Just tired from work. His friends at the construction company where he worked as a foreman started noticing his stress. His buddy Kendrick had pulled him aside just last week. "Man, you look terrible. What's going on?" Garrett had wanted to confide in someone, but the words felt too heavy, too shameful somehow. "Just not sleeping well," he'd muttered. "Trouble at home?" Kendrick had pressed. Garrett had shaken his head, but they both knew it was a lie. The truth was, dark thoughts had started creeping into Garrett's mind, thoughts he hated himself for having. Was Bryn having an affair? Was she meeting someone in the garage? But that didn't make sense. He would have heard a car, seen evidence of someone else. Was she planning to leave him? Was she secretly packing things away, preparing for a life without him? The not knowing was eating him alive from the inside out. He'd even considered putting a camera in the garage, but something stopped him. Maybe it was respect for her privacy. Maybe it was fear of what he might discover. Or maybe, deep down, he hoped that his wife would eventually trust him enough to tell him the truth on her own. But she never did. And so, on Christmas Eve, as they decorated their tree together and sang along to carols as they'd exchanged small gifts and kissed under the mistletoe, Garrett had made a decision. Tonight, he would follow her. Tonight, he would finally learn the truth, no matter how much it hurt. At 11:47 p.m., they'd gone to bed. Bryn had fallen asleep quickly, or at least pretended to. Garrett had lain there in the darkness, his heart racing, watching the red numbers on the alarm clock tick closer to midnight. At 11:58, Bryn had stirred. At 11:59, she'd carefully slipped out from under the covers. And at exactly midnight, she'd left the bedroom. Garrett had waited 2 minutes before following her, moving as silently as he could through the dark house. When he'd reached the garage door, he'd heard it. The sound of crying. Not just tears, but deep, soul-crushing sobs that seemed to come from the very depths of her being. He'd slowly pushed open the door, just enough to see inside. And that's when he'd seen her kneeling on the floor, clutching something in her hands, her whole body shaking with grief. And what Garrett saw, clutched in his wife's trembling hands, made every muscle in his body freeze with shock. It was a tiny pink onesie, small enough to fit in the palm of her hand, with little white flowers embroidered on the collar. Bryn held it pressed against her chest, like it was the most precious thing in the world, rocking back and forth on her knees, whispering something Garrett couldn't quite hear through the door. Next to her on the concrete floor sat a cardboard box, its lid open, and even from where he stood, Garrett could see it was filled with more baby clothes. Blankets, a stuffed rabbit, a silver rattle. Garrett's mind went completely blank. Baby clothes. Bryn had been coming to the garage every night to cry over baby clothes, but they didn't have children. They'd talked about starting a family someday, maybe in a year or two when they'd saved more money, but there had been no pregnancy, no baby, at least not that he knew of. His hand gripped the doorframe so hard his knuckles turned white. 1,000 questions exploded in his brain at once. Had Bryn been pregnant and lost the baby without telling him? Had she miscarried in secret? Was this from before they'd met? Why would she hide this from him? Why would she suffer alone night after night instead of letting him hold her, comfort her, grieve with her? The sound of her voice finally reached his ears, and what she was saying made his heart crack into a million pieces. "I'm so sorry, baby girl. Mommy's so sorry. I tried so hard. I would have given you everything. I would have loved you so much." Her voice broke on the last word, dissolving into sobs that shook her entire frame. Garrett couldn't stand it anymore. He pushed open the door completely and stepped into the garage. Bryn! She spun around so fast she nearly fell over, her eyes wide with shock and something that looked like fear. She quickly tried to stuff the onesie back into the box, her hands fumbling, her face flushed with embarrassment and panic. "Garrett, what are you? You shouldn't be. I thought you were asleep." He crossed the garage in 3 long strides and knelt down beside her, gently taking her hands in his. They were ice cold and trembling. "Honey, please tell me what's going on. I can't watch you hurt like this anymore." "I'm fine. I told you. You're not fine." The words came out louder than he'd intended, echoing off the garage walls. He took a breath, softened his voice. "Bryn, you've been coming out here every night for 3 months. You've been crying over baby clothes. Please. Whatever this is, whatever happened, you don't have to carry it alone. I'm your husband. Let me in." Bryn's face crumpled, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. For a long moment she just stared at him, and Garrett could see the war happening behind her eyes, the desperate need to tell someone battling against the fear of saying the words out loud. Finally she whispered, "I didn't want you to hate me." "Hate you?" Garrett pulled her into his arms, and she collapsed against his chest. "I could never hate you. Never. Whatever it is, we'll face it together." She pulled back slightly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Her voice came out small and broken. "Do you remember when I had that bad stomach flu back in August? When I was sick for a week?" Garrett nodded. He remembered. She'd been miserable, barely able to keep food down, running a high fever. He'd taken time off work to take care of her. "It wasn't the flu," Bryn said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was pregnant, Garrett. 8 weeks pregnant. And I didn't know until I started bleeding and cramping so badly I thought I was dying. By the time I got to the hospital, it was too late. I'd lost the baby." The words hit Garrett like a physical blow. He felt all the air leave his lungs. "You were pregnant? We were going to have a baby and you didn't tell me? I didn't know." The anguish in her voice was raw and desperate. "I'd been so stressed with work. My cycle has never been regular anyway, and I just thought I was getting sick. I didn't take a test. I didn't even consider that I might be pregnant. And then when I started miscarrying, everything happened so fast. The pain, the blood, the emergency room." She covered her face with her hands. "By the time they confirmed it was a miscarriage, our baby was already gone." Garrett's eyes burned with tears he'd been holding back for weeks, but now they fell freely. "Why didn't you tell me when it happened? Why did you go through that alone?" "Because I felt like it was my fault." Bryn's voice rose, filled with a guilt so profound it seemed to consume her. "What kind of mother doesn't know she's pregnant? What kind of woman loses a baby she didn't even know existed? I felt so stupid, so guilty, so broken. And these clothes." She looked down at the box, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The doctor said it was a girl. They asked if I wanted to know, and I said yes. After it was all over, I went to the store and I bought these things because I needed something tangible, something real to prove that she existed. That our daughter existed, even if only for 8 weeks. Garrett pulled her close again, his own tears mixing with hers. "Her name," he managed to say through the tightness in his throat. "Did you give her a name?" Bryn nodded against his chest. "Hope. I named her Hope." They held each other on the cold garage floor, crying for the daughter they'd lost, for the future that had been stolen from them, for all the pain Bryn had endured in silence. Garrett's heart ached not just for the baby, but for his wife, who had suffered through this nightmare alone, convinced that she was somehow to blame. "It wasn't your fault," he whispered fiercely. "Do you hear me? It wasn't your fault. Miscarriages happen. It's not because of anything you did or didn't do. But I should have known. I should have. You're a nurse, Bryn. You know that's not how it works. You know that miscarriages are common, that they just happen sometimes with no explanation and no one to blame. Knowing it medically and feeling it emotionally are two different things, she said quietly. They sat there for a long time, just holding each other, until Bryn finally pulled back and looked at him with red, swollen eyes. "There's more," she said, and the way she said it made Garrett's stomach drop. "The reason I've been coming out here every night, the reason I couldn't tell you about Hope." She took a shuddering breath. 2 weeks after the miscarriage, I went back for a follow-up appointment. They ran some tests, did an ultrasound to make sure everything was healing properly, and that's when they found it. "Found what?" Garrett asked, though part of him didn't want to know. Bryn reached into the box and pulled out a manila envelope that had been hidden beneath the baby clothes. Her hands shook as she handed it to him. "The ultrasound showed something on my left ovary, a mass. They did more tests, a biopsy, and—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't have to. Garrett's hands trembled as he opened the envelope and pulled out the medical documents inside. His eyes scanned the pages, trying to make sense of the technical medical terminology, until 2 words jumped out at him in bold letters that might as well have been written in blood. Ovarian cancer. The envelope slipped from his fingers and scattered across the garage floor. And in that moment, Garrett understood with devastating clarity why his wife had been disappearing every midnight, why she'd been crying over baby clothes in the darkness, why she'd kept this terrible secret locked inside her heart. But what he read next on those scattered pages made him realize that the nightmare was far worse than he could have ever imagined. The diagnosis was stage 3C, advanced, aggressive. The cancer had already spread beyond the ovary into the abdominal cavity. Treatment would require immediate surgery, followed by intensive chemotherapy, and even then, the 5-year survival rate was only 39%. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the handwritten note paper-clipped to the front of the report, dated 3 weeks ago, from Bryn's oncologist, Dr. Patricia Hillman. Garrett picked it up with shaking hands and read it aloud, his voice cracking with each word. "Bryn, as we discussed, proceeding with the recommended hysterectomy and aggressive treatment protocol will save your life, but it will permanently eliminate any possibility of future pregnancy. I understand this is devastating news so soon after your miscarriage. Please call my office to schedule the surgery. Time is critical. We cannot delay much longer." 3 weeks ago. She'd known for 3 weeks that she needed this surgery, that her life was literally at stake, and she still hadn't scheduled it. Garrett looked up at his wife, and the expression on her face told him everything he needed to know. "You haven't called her back," he said, and it wasn't a question. Bryn shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I can't, Garrett. Don't you see? If I have the surgery, we'll never have children, ever. Hope was our only chance, and I didn't even know she existed until she was gone. And now if I want to live, I have to make sure we can never have another baby. I have to choose between my life and any possibility of us ever being parents." "That's not a choice." Garrett's voice rose with desperate urgency. "Bryn, you are my everything. You are my whole world. I don't care about having biological children if it means losing you." "But I care." She stood up abruptly, her voice raw with anguish. "I care that I'm taking that away from you. You'd be such an amazing father, Garrett. I've seen how you are with your nephew, how your whole face lights up when you hold him. I've heard you talk about coaching Little League someday, about teaching your kids how to build things with their hands like your dad taught you. And now because of me, because my body is broken and diseased, you'll never have that." Garrett stood too, gripping her shoulders gently but firmly. "Listen to me. Really listen. Yes, I've thought about being a dad someday. But do you know what I think about every single day? You. Coming home to you. Growing old with you. 50 years from now, sitting on a porch somewhere with you, still holding your hand. That's what I want. That's what I need. And none of that happens if you're not here. But what if you resent me later? What if 10 years from now you look at me and wish you'd married someone who could give you a family? We are a family, Garrett said fiercely. You and me, that's our family. And if someday we decide we want kids, there are so many children in this world who need homes, who need love. We can adopt, we can foster, we have options. But none of those options matter if you're not alive to explore them with me. Bryn's face crumpled, and she collapsed into his arms again, her body racked with sobs. I'm so scared, Garrett. I'm so scared of dying. I'm scared of the surgery. I'm scared of losing myself, of losing who I am. And I'm scared that even with treatment, it might not be enough. I'm scared too, he admitted, his own voice breaking. I'm terrified, but we're going to face this together. You're not alone anymore. Do you understand? No more midnight trips to the garage to cry by yourself. No more carrying this weight on your own. From this moment forward, we fight this together. They stood there in the garage, holding each other as Christmas Eve turned into Christmas morning, the first rays of dawn beginning to peek through the small window. The box of baby clothes sat on the floor beside them, a memorial to hope and to the future they'd imagined. But it was also a reminder of something else, that love wasn't always about the life you planned, but about choosing to fight for the life you had. We need to call Dr. Hillman first thing tomorrow, Garrett said softly. Today, I mean. It's Christmas. But we'll call her emergency line. We can't wait any longer. Bryn pulled back and looked at him. Really looked at him. And for the first time in 3 months, Garrett saw something other than grief and fear in her eyes. He saw determination. He saw hope. Not the baby they'd lost, but the living, breathing hope that maybe, just maybe, they could survive this. Okay, she whispered. Okay. They went back inside as the sun rose on Christmas morning, leaving the box in the garage but carrying Hope's memory in their hearts. Garrett made coffee while Bryn found Dr. Hillman's emergency number. The conversation was brief. The doctor would see them at the hospital in 2 hours, even on Christmas Day, because that's what you did when a patient's life was on the line. As they sat at the kitchen table waiting, Bryn reached across and took Garrett's hand. I'm sorry I shut you out. I'm sorry I tried to protect you by pushing you away. I'm sorry I didn't push harder to find out what was wrong, Garrett replied. I knew something was tearing you apart, and I should have... No. Bryn squeezed his hand. You respected my space. That's not a bad thing. I needed to learn that it's okay to let someone carry the weight with me. They sat in silence for a moment, and then Garrett said, After you're better, and you will get better, I want us to do something for Hope. Maybe plant a tree in the backyard, maybe make a donation to the NICU in her name, something to honor her memory. Fresh tears filled Bryn's eyes, but this time they weren't tears of lonely grief. They were tears of shared mourning, of love, of gratitude that she didn't have to face this alone anymore. I'd like that. I'd really like that. The surgery was scheduled for December 28th, 3 days away. Dr. Hillman was optimistic that they'd caught it in time, that aggressive treatment could save Bryn's life. The road ahead would be long and brutal. Surgery, chemotherapy, endless doctor's appointments, side effects, fear, and uncertainty. But they would walk that road together. As they drove to the hospital that Christmas morning, Garrett thought about the title of their lives, how it might read to someone on the outside. Wife always go to the garage every midnight. Husband followed her on. Christmas Eve. And he was shocked. But the real story wasn't about secrets or suspicion or betrayal. It was about grief, about fear, about the weight of carrying impossible choices alone. It was about a woman who loved her husband so much she tried to protect him from her pain, and a husband who loved his wife enough to demand to share that pain with her. It was about learning that the strongest marriages aren't the ones without tragedy, but the ones where two people face tragedy together, hand in hand, refusing to let go even when the darkness seems overwhelming. 6 months later, Bryn would ring the bell at the cancer center, signaling the end of her chemotherapy. Her hair would be gone, her body would be weak, but she would be alive. They would go home to the cherry tree they'd planted in the backyard, the one with a small plaque that read, "Hope, forever in our hearts." And they would hold each other, grateful for every single day they had together. But that morning, as they walked into the hospital on Christmas Day to begin the fight for Bryn's life, they didn't know how the story would end. They only knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. And sometimes, that's all the hope you need to keep going. As Garrett held the hospital door open for his wife, watching her take a deep breath and square her shoulders before walking through, he realized something profound. The shock he'd felt in the garage wasn't just about discovering her secret. It was about discovering the depth of love that had driven her to suffer in silence, trying to spare him pain. And it was about discovering his own capacity to love her through anything: cancer, loss, fear, and all the uncertainty that lay ahead. They walked into the hospital hand in hand, ready to fight, ready to hope, ready to live whatever life they had left together. Because in the end, that's what love really means. Not the fairy tale version where nothing goes wrong, but the real version where everything goes wrong, and you choose each other anyway, over and over again, until your very last breath. And that choice, made every single day, was what made a marriage not just survive, but truly thrive.